So, you've just finished that first lesson, and now you've started to maybe work on your workbook, and you've realized that the workbook starts with a quick review. Well, the purpose of those quick reviews is to review, obviously, some topics that have been talked about in a previous math course that are important for you to know to successfully do the work this week. Not necessarily the specific assignment that you're going to be starting with right now. For example, one of the things that we're going to be talking about in a minute, you're not going to be doing until 3 days from now. It'll be the third homework assignment of the week. So we're going to be reviewing some of those topics, and it's up to you if you want to use this video or not. Some people like just reading and looking at the examples and trying to pick it up real quickly, but other people don't learn that easily just by reading, because reading a math textbook is kind of tricky sometimes. It's not nearly as fun as reading just a fictional book. So that's the purpose of these videos, just to help you out, and it's going to cover the same content, the same problems, the same types of problems that would be in your workbook. So let's start by looking at adding and subtracting negative numbers. Now, negative numbers can be kind of tricky. So let's say if we have a problem like this, negative 2 plus negative 6. So negative 2 plus negative 6 will be equal to negative 8. Now, sometimes students, negative numbers can be kind of abstract. So I like to make a connection with something that we can all relate to. Money. We can all relate to money, right? Either we have it or we don't. And we've all been there where we've both had and had money. So, if we see a negative number, I want you to think of it as owing someone money. If you have a positive number, that's when you have that much money. All right? So in this scenario, if you owed someone $2 and then you owed someone else $6, well, you owe a total of $8. So that makes it a little bit easier to relate with. Let's look at another example. Let's say if we had a positive 2 plus negative 6. That's going to equal negative 4. The reason for that is if you had $2, then you remembered, oh, that's right, I owe my parents $6, so you pay them the $2 that you currently have. Well, now you only owe them $4, so it'll be negative 4. Let's look at another example. Let's say if we had negative 2 plus a positive 6. Well, that's going to be 4. So that would be like, let's say if you owe your parents $2 and now you just made $6, so you're going to pay your parents the $2 that you owe them. Well, guess what? You get to keep $4, so you have $4 left over. Okay, so those are some examples with adding and subtracting negative numbers. So if you struggle with that concept, try to connect it with money, and I think that'll make it easier for you. Well, let's also review multiplying negative numbers. Now, when we multiply negative numbers, we have these rules. So let's look at each of these. So the first rule is a negative times a positive is a negative. The next one is positive times negative numbers will also always be a negative answer. The third rule is a negative times a negative will be a positive. That's one of the few times when two wrongs really do make a right. Let me explain. I had a teacher, remember that teacher that I talked about that really made math kind of click for me? Years ago, Mr. Coughlin, thank you very much. He gave this example, and I've got kind of a twisted sense of humor, so this connected with me really well. Think of a negative number, or think about the first number as a bad thing or a good thing happening to someone, and the second number describing the type of person. Here's what I mean. A negative times a positive is like a bad thing happening to a good person. You don't want bad things happening to good people. That's bad. So a bad thing happening to a good person is bad, so it's negative. Now let's make that connection to the next one. Positive times a negative is a negative. So if a good thing happens to a bad person, that's bad. We don't want good things happening to bad people. That's negative. And lastly, negative times a negative is a positive. An easy way to connect that is if a bad thing happens to a bad person, we like it when that happens, even though that might not be the best state of mind to be in. But if a bad thing happens to a bad person, we think they deserve it. That's positive. So like I said, I got kind of twisted sense of humor. So for me, that connected. Maybe that connects for you. So let's look at some examples so we can see how that works. So negative 2 times 5. So 2 times 5 is 10. So we have a negative times a positive. So that's going to be a negative answer. Or you can think of it as a bad thing happens to a good person. That's bad. So your answer is going to be negative. So get another example. 2 times negative 5. So it'd be like a good thing happening to a bad person. We don't want that happening. That's bad. So your answer is going to be negative. So that's going to be negative 10 as well. Now if we had negative 2 times negative 5, if a bad thing happens to a bad person, yeah, that's good. So that's going to be positive. So it's going to be a positive 10. Now, obviously, a positive times a positive stays a positive. So if a good thing happens to a good person, that's also always positive. All right. Let's review exponents. Now, this is something you're not going to see in this very first assignment. But I believe it's your third assignment, and assignment C is where you're going to start to see some exponents. We're going to have to do this on your own. So let's review this concept. So remember, an exponent just refers to how many times we multiply that number by itself. So 3 squared means that we would multiply 3 times itself twice. So 3 times 3, which would give you 9. Now, this gets a little trickier when we deal with negative numbers. So if it's a negative 3 being squared, now notice what this looks like. It's a negative 3 in parentheses being squared. So the whole quantity is going to be multiplied by itself. So it would be negative 3 times a negative 3. Now remember, a negative times a negative is a positive. So this would be a positive 9. Let's look at another one. You might say, well, what's the difference? Do you notice a difference between these two? It's a slight difference, but it can make a really big difference in the long run. So the fact that this one has a negative 3 being squared, but the negative isn't in parentheses, means the square only applies to the 3. The square doesn't apply to the negative. So the way you can think of this one is, we're going to take the opposite, or take the negative of whatever 3 times 3 is. And 3 times 3 is 9, so this will be a negative 9. Now we could have other exponents, remember, like if we have a cube. 3 cubed means that it's going to be multiplied times itself 3 times. So 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. So let's look at a negative this time. Let's say if it's negative 3 cubed. So it's in parentheses. So it means a negative gets included. So it would be negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. So a negative times a negative is a positive. So now we'd have positive 9. And 9 times negative 3, so it's a positive 9 times a negative 3, will be a negative 27. Let's look at one more. This time, just like the previous set of examples, we have a negative not in parentheses. So the negative is not going to get cubed. So only the 3 gets cubed. So we'd have 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 is 27. Now we tack on that negative, and so we have an answer of negative 27. So there you go. Good luck now as you work on this lesson 1A today.